Last Sunday we heard the voice of Peter. Now we hear the voice of Paul, in the only letter he wrote, or dictated in fact, to a community he didn't know personally. When he produced Romans, he hadn't yet been to Rome, so he's stating his position at some length to an important community among whom he hoped to find a welcome. He needed a bed. There was a risk that his teaching had been misunderstood in Rome, the teaching that finds red-hot voice in the letter to the Galatians. Now, it's clear that Paul was very angry when dictating Galatians, and like the rest of us, his language ran away with him a bit under the pressure of anger. The problem was that some Jewish Christians had followed Paul into Galatia, saying that Gentiles had to become Jews in order to be Christians. Now, this was a direct contradiction of Paul, who had said to them that Gentiles didn't have to enter the church through the door of the synagogue. They could become Christians without becoming Jews. For Paul, the question was never about Jews who became Christians. It was only a question about the Gentiles, the non-Jews. Jews didn't cease being Jews when they were baptised, but Gentiles didn't have to become Jews in order to be Christians. In other words, the church wasn't just a sect within Judaism. It was a related but distinct intervention of God, which included all people, breaking down the wall of division between Jew and Gentile. The church was something new. News of the letter to the Galatians had almost certainly reached Rome, and in that largely Jewish Christian community, there was a real danger of misunderstanding. In Romans, therefore, Paul spells out his teaching in more measured and comprehensive terms. And the teaching is about a God who offers the free gift we call grace to all people. It's of that gift that Paul speaks in the text from Romans given here. The community to whom he wrote was already a community under pressure. The pressure would reach its climax during the persecution under Nero, a little later, when both Peter and Paul would die a martyr's death. But the pressure was already being felt. Paul asks, if God is for us, who is against us? Well, there were plenty of people against the Roman Christians, which is why it's crucial for Paul to say that God is for us. He goes on to speak of charges being brought against God's elect and of condemnation coming their way. The implication is that charges and condemnation were in fact coming their way. But the further implication is that this isn't the end of the story, because for God's elect, his chosen ones, the only charge that would matter would be a charge brought by God. And if God has declared his elect to be innocent, justified them, as Paul has it, then human condemnation just doesn't matter. The word justify is important for Paul. It's the language of the law courts. And when he says that God justifies us, it means that God is like a judge who, despite our offences, has declared us to be innocent. Because God's is a court where mercy prevails rather than the quid pro quo, the logic of crime and punishment. So Paul uses the language of human justice to proclaim another logic, the logic of God's mercy offered to all people, Jew and Gentile alike. All have sinned, but all are offered the gift of justification. The death of Jesus, which Paul mentions, was the triumph of mercilessness. But the resurrection and ascension of Jesus, which Paul also mentions, are the triumph of mercy, the mercy which breaks down the wall of separation between Jew and Gentile, and which makes the us, we hear in this text, apply not just to one group in opposition to another, it applies to all human beings, since God is for all and God's plan excludes no one. The sign of God's enduring partiality towards human beings, his willingness to be merciful, is that Jesus, even though now he's returned to the right hand of God, is still engaged with us on our journey out of the world of mercilessness into the world of mercy. According to Paul, he still intercedes for us. He still journeys with us. God still doesn't withhold his own Son. The God who gave him up for us all still gives Jesus as the supreme sign that God is for us. He remains with us as the living promise that the God who has given and still gives us Jesus will also give us everything else. So Jesus is past, present, and future.